Hello everyone. Welcome to Story Hub channel. Discover real stories of wife betrayals, shocking twists and turns and their secrets. Hit the subscribe button and get to our story. It was one of those afternoons where everything felt too calm, almost like the calm before a storm. I was sitting on the couch, aimlessly flipping through TV channels, but my mind was far from the screen. I'd been noticing some unsettling changes in my wife Sarah for months now. Little things that ate away at me like a constant nagging itch. Lately, she'd been heading out to work earlier than usual and coming back home much later, always with her phone in hand, speaking in hushed tones and flashing sly smiles that she barely tried to hide. Whenever I asked her about it, she'd just brush it off, saying it was work-related or that she was catching up with friends. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. Sarah was in the bedroom, packing for a girls' trip she'd been excited about for weeks. The uneasy feeling in my gut had grown too big to ignore. I could hear her moving between the closet and the suitcase, and my mind was racing with thoughts I didn't want to entertain. "Are you sure you need to go on this trip?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady as I leaned against the doorframe. The question had been eating at me for days, but I didn't want to come off as paranoid. Now, though, I couldn't hold it in any longer. Sarah didn't even look up from her suitcase. "Jake, we've already talked about this. I need some time away," she replied, her tone flat, almost like she'd practiced it. "Time to clear my head." "A whole week, though," I pressed, feeling my chest tighten. "You've never gone away like this without me, not for this long." Finally, Sarah turned to face me, her eyes cold. "I'm an independent woman, Jake. I don't need your permission to take a trip with my friends. You're not my keeper." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. I could feel a lump forming in my throat, but I swallowed it down. Starting another fight wasn't going to solve anything. Not now. "Fine," I muttered, stepping back. "Just be safe, okay?" Sarah rolled her eyes and went back to packing. I wanted to convince myself that everything would be fine, that my worries were just in my head. But as I watched her move back and forth, something caught my eye that made my heart drop into my stomach. There, in the corner of the suitcase, tucked under a pile of clothes, was a skimpy police officer costume, complete with a badge, handcuffs, and a hat. It wasn't exactly what you'd pack for a simple girl's getaway. "What the hell, Sarah?" My voice erupted, filled with a mix of anger and disbelief. My pulse quickened as I stared at the incriminating outfit. "Why do you have that?" Sarah glanced up, momentarily surprised, but then a smug grin spread across her face. "Oh, this?" she said, pulling the costume out and holding it up like it was no big deal. "It's just for fun. The girls and I are planning a little party." The sight of it made my blood boil. My fists clenched, and I felt a rage rising inside me that I didn't even know I was capable of. "If you walk out of this house with that," I growled, my voice low and threatening, "I swear to God, Sarah, I'll break your legs." Sarah let out a cold, mocking laugh that sent chills down my spine. "Shut up, Jake. Don't try to control me. I told you, I'm an independent woman. I can do whatever I want." She reached into the cupboard and pulled out an extra-large condom, waving it in my face with a twisted grin. "Oh, and by the way, my lover's already waiting for me outside." My world fell apart in a heartbeat. Every doubt, every nagging suspicion came crashing down on me with brutal clarity. The betrayal was more than I could handle. My hands shook, not out of fear, but from a burning rage that coursed through every vein in my body. Without saying a word, I stormed out of the bedroom, my heart pounding like a drum. I flew down the stairs, flinging the front door open with such force that it slammed against the wall. And there he was, Sarah's lover, standing there without a care in the world, leaning casually against his car with a cigarette hanging from his lips. "You!" I roared, my voice thick with fury, as I crossed the lawn in a few quick strides. Before the guy could even react, I grabbed him by the collar, yanking him toward the house with such force that the cigarette fell from his mouth. "Hey, what the hell?" he stammered, struggling against my iron grip. But I wasn't listening. I dragged him inside, slamming the door shut behind us. In one swift, brutal move, I shoved him onto the living room floor. Sarah must have heard the commotion, because she came rushing down the stairs, her face a mix of shock and fear. "Jake, stop it! What the hell are you doing?" But I didn't respond. My vision was clouded by rage, my mind a whirlwind of betrayal and pain. There was no way I was going to let them get away with this, not Sarah, and not this scumbag. This was the moment everything changed, and I knew there was no turning back. The house echoed with the sounds of struggle as I unleashed all my pent-up fury. I had him pinned on the floor, my fists coming down with a force I didn't even know I had. Each punch was a release, a brutal catharsis of all the pain and betrayal that had been eating away at me for months. The guy beneath me gasped, trying to shield himself, but my rage was like a violent storm, unstoppable and relentless. Sarah's screams filled the air as she tried to pull me off her lover, her hands clawing at my shoulders in a desperate attempt to stop me. "Jake, stop! Please, stop it!" I shook her off with a snarl, my eyes wild with anger. "You think you can come into my house, sleep with my wife, and just walk away?" I spat, every word dripping with venom. "You really think I'm going to let you get away with this?" The man could barely speak, his words coming out in broken gasps. "Please, I didn't know. I didn't—" "Shut up!" I roared, my fist connecting with his jaw in a sickening thud. His head snapped to the side, and he fell silent, the fight completely knocked out of him. Sarah was sobbing now, her voice shrill and panicked. "Jake, you're going to kill him. Please, stop." I paused, my chest heaving as I looked down at the man crumpled on the floor, his face a bloody mess. But seeing him like that didn't bring me any satisfaction. It wasn't enough. This wasn't the kind of revenge that would make them feel the depth of my pain. I needed something more, something that would truly make them understand the hell they'd put me through. I turned to Sarah, my eyes cold, stripped of any warmth. "You think you're in control, Sarah? You think you can do whatever you want without facing the consequences?" My voice was low, a dangerous calm that made her blood run cold. Sarah backed away, fear flashing in her eyes as she tried to reason with me. "Jake, don't do something you'll regret. Please, we can talk about this." A twisted smile curled my lips, but there was no kindness in it. "Oh, I won't regret this. Not for a second." I grabbed her wrist, dragging her toward the bedroom where her half-packed suitcase lay open on the bed. Without a word, I yanked the skimpy police officer costume from the suitcase and thrust it into her hands. "Put it on," I ordered, my voice as cold as ice. Sarah stared at me in disbelief, her voice trembling with shock. "What? Are you out of your mind?" My grip on her wrist tightened, my eyes darkening with intensity. "Put it on, Sarah, or I swear to God you'll regret it." Tears streamed down her face as the reality of the situation sank in. She had never seen me like this before, never imagined I could be so cruel. Her hands shook as she slowly began unbuttoning her blouse, slipping into the costume with trembling fingers. She could barely see through her tears as she fumbled with the buttons, her mind spinning with fear and regret. Once she fastened the belt and adjusted the hat, she finally looked at me, her voice barely above a whisper. "Jake, please." But my expression was cold and unreadable as I watched her. When she was done, I nodded toward the living room. "Go sit with your lover. Wait for the police." Sarah's eyes widened in horror. "The police? What do you mean?" I didn't bother to answer. Instead, I walked over to the phone, dialing the emergency number with calm, steady hands, my eyes never leaving Sarah's as I spoke to the dispatcher. "Yes. I'd like to report a disturbance at my home. My wife and her affair partner are here. I think you'll want to see this." When I hung up the phone, the silence that followed was overwhelming. Sarah looked at me, her eyes filled with desperation. "Jake, please don't do this. We can work this out. Just don't do this." But I was done listening. I was done with the lies, the betrayal, and all the pain that had consumed me. I walked past Sarah and the man still crumpled on the floor, heading for the door. I grabbed the suitcase I had packed earlier, knowing this moment would come, and paused at the threshold. "I'm taking everything, Sarah," I said coldly, without turning to face her. "The money, the house, the inheritance, everything. You've lost it all, and you'll never see me again." Sarah's sobs filled the room as she collapsed onto the floor, her hands covering her face. She had believed she was in control, that she could do whatever she wanted, and I would always be there, always forgive her. But now, she realized just how wrong she had been. She had lost everything, and there was no going back. As I stepped outside, the distant wail of sirens began to grow louder. I didn't look back as I got into my car and drove away. The night was dark, the road ahead stretching into the unknown. But for the first time in months, a cold sense of satisfaction settled over me. I had done what needed to be done. I had taken back control, and in doing so, I had ensured that Sarah and her lover would pay for their betrayal. The image of Sarah in that ridiculous costume, trying to explain herself to the police, brought a grim smile to my face. It wasn't just about revenge, it was about making sure she would never forget this night, that she would never forget what she had done. As the sirens faded into the distance behind me, I kept driving. I didn't know where I was going, and I didn't care. All I knew was that I was free. Free from the lies, free from the betrayal, and free from the life I had once thought was my future. And as I drove into the night, that cold, brutal satisfaction stayed with me. A constant reminder that I had taken back my life, and that I would never let anyone take it from me again. I didn't slow down until I reached the airport. The hum of the car engine faded as I turned off the ignition and stepped out. I moved with purpose, my footsteps echoing in the nearly empty parking garage. Inside, the airport buzzed with life, a stark contrast to the chaos I had left behind. But I didn't let myself dwell on that. I had a plan, and I was determined to execute it perfectly. I approached the ticket counter with a calm I hadn't felt in years, my mind replaying every detail of the past hour. Sarah's tear-streaked face, her lover's muffled groans of pain on the living room floor, and the cold, methodical way I had packed my suitcase for the last time. It all felt like a dream. Surreal, yet painfully clear. I had known, even before confronting Sarah, that something was deeply wrong. And now my suspicions had been confirmed in the most brutal way possible. When it was my turn at the counter, I handed over my passport without a moment's hesitation. "One-way ticket," I said, my voice steady, "to the Caribbean. Anywhere quiet." The agent looked at me, perhaps sensing that something was off, but didn't ask any questions. After a few quick taps on the keyboard, she handed me the ticket. "Your flight leaves in an hour," she informed me. I nodded, taking the ticket and moving away from the counter. I had already taken care of everything, transferring funds, closing accounts, tying up all the loose ends. I had known this day might come, and I was ready for it. As I walked toward the security checkpoint, an unexpected sense of calm washed over me. My life as I knew it was over, but oddly enough, that realization brought me peace. I cleared security without issue and found my gate. The waiting area was nearly empty, just a few weary travelers scattered among the seats. I chose a spot by the window, staring out at the runway. The city lights flickered in the distance, slowly blending into the darkness as night deepened. The weight of what I had done should have been overwhelming, but instead, all I felt was a profound sense of closure. My marriage, once the cornerstone of my world, was gone, shattered by betrayal. But in its place, I had found something new, a chance to start fresh. When boarding was announced, I joined the line, my thoughts drifting back to those final moments at the house. I had walked out without a backward glance, leaving Sarah to face the consequences of her actions. She had believed she was in control, but in the end, I had the last word. As I settled into my seat on the plane, I looked out the window, watching as the city below shrank away while the plane climbed higher. The lights grew smaller and smaller until they vanished entirely, swallowed by the night. I knew there would be fallout. Questions, investigations, maybe even repercussions. But that was for another time, another life. For now, I was free. As the plane ascended, my thoughts drifted away from the past. My future was unwritten, a blank slate in a place where no one knew who I was. And that was exactly what I needed. The turbulence of my life had ended, and as I flew toward the horizon, all I could feel was relief. The island greeted me with a warmth that felt almost surreal compared to the cold, calculated life I had left behind. The villa I rented wasn't anything extravagant, but it was perfectly situated on the beach where soft golden sands met the turquoise waters. It was here, far removed from the chaos and betrayal, that I began the slow, deliberate process of rebuilding my life. Each morning, I woke up to the soothing rhythm of the waves. The sound was like a balm to my soul, gently washing away the residual anger that had once consumed me. My days became simple, almost ritualistic, designed to keep my mind from wandering back to the dark times. I would take a swim in the clear, cool water, feeling the weight of the past slip away with each stroke. The ocean became my confessional, a place where I could leave my sins behind and emerge, if not completely cleansed, then at least a little lighter. In the afternoons, I often found myself wandering the island, discovering hidden trails that twisted through dense tropical forests. I met the locals, folks who had spent their entire lives on the island and welcomed me with a warmth I hadn't felt in years. They didn't pry into my past or ask questions I wasn't ready to answer. They were content to let me be, offering a friendly wave or inviting me to share a meal, and in return, I found a quiet solace in their company. My evenings were spent on the porch of the villa, a book in one hand and a glass of rum in the other. The sunsets here were nothing short of spectacular, the sky ablaze with colors that slowly melted into the horizon as the sun dipped below the water. In those moments, I would allow myself to reflect. The memories of what I had done, the revenge I had exacted, were never far from my thoughts. But in the calm of those evenings, they felt like memories from another life, one that I was slowly, though painfully, distancing myself from. Yet, no matter how peaceful my new life seemed, the past had a way of creeping back when I least expected it. Sometimes, late at night, when the world was silent except for the rhythmic lapping of the waves, I would lie in bed staring at the ceiling, and the memories would rush back with a force that took my breath away. I could see Sarah's tear-streaked face, hear the desperate pleas of her lover, and feel the cold satisfaction that had settled in my chest as I watched them suffer. It was a satisfaction that now made me shudder. The guilt, though dulled by time and distance, was still there, lurking in the shadows of my mind. It gnawed at me, especially when I saw couples walking hand in hand along the beach, laughing and carefree. Their happiness was a sharp reminder of what I had lost, or rather, what I had destroyed. There was a time when Sarah and I had been like that, before lies and infidelity had torn us apart. Those memories cut deep, leaving behind a lingering ache that refused to heal. Music was another trigger, bringing back memories with cruel precision. A song would play on the radio, a melody that Sarah and I had once danced to, and for a brief moment, it was as if she were there with me, her head resting on my shoulder, her laughter filling the air. But then, reality would crash in, and the pain would come rushing back, raw and fresh, pulling me into a sea of regret. Life on the island was peaceful, but it also served as a constant reminder that I was hiding, not truly living. The island was my sanctuary, yes, but it was also a cage, a place where I could escape, but never really move on. I realized I couldn't stay here forever, trapped in limbo, haunted by the ghosts of my past. The tranquility of the island was a temporary reprieve, not a permanent solution. I needed closure, a way to confront and accept the darkness that had taken hold of me. So, after 8 months of isolation, I made the decision to return to the mainland. It wasn't an easy choice. The thought of leaving the safety of the island filled me with anxiety, but I knew it was necessary. I couldn't keep hiding. To truly start over, I needed to face what I had done and come to terms with it. Only then could I hope to find peace. As I packed my belongings, I took one last look at the villa, the beach, and the ocean that had been my refuge. The island had given me time to heal, but now it was time to take the next step. I didn't know what awaited me on the mainland, but I knew one thing for certain. I couldn't keep running from my past. It was time to face it once and for all. Returning to the mainland felt like stepping into a surreal version of reality, a world that had moved on without me. The familiar sights and sounds were still there, but everything felt off, distant, like I was a ghost drifting through a life that no longer belonged to me. I had vanished without a trace, leaving behind chaos and unanswered questions. But time had a way of erasing old stories, and the world had moved on, consumed by new scandals and events. I was no longer the man I once was. That person had been left behind on the island. To avoid drawing attention, I adopted a new identity. I rented a modest apartment in a quiet part of town, using a false name and paying in cash to stay under the radar. The life I once knew was gone, replaced by the anonymity I had chosen. But something had drawn me back to the city, maybe a need for closure or an unconscious desire to confront the consequences of my actions. One of my first stops was the old neighborhood. As I drove past the house that had once been my refuge, a wave of melancholy washed over me. The place that had once been full of life now looked neglected. The lawn was overgrown, the paint on the shutters was chipped and peeling, and a faded "for sale" sign stood in the front yard, swaying gently in the breeze. Seeing it like this, I felt a sharp pang of regret, but I quickly buried it. That life was over, and there was no point in clinging to the past. Unable to sleep one night, I took to driving through the city, revisiting places that held memories of my life with Sarah. I passed the restaurant where we had shared our first date, the park where we had picnicked on sunny afternoons, and the hotel where we had spent our honeymoon. Each stop brought back a flood of memories, some filled with happiness, others tinged with bitterness. But all of them were overshadowed by the knowledge of how it had all ended. Eventually, I found myself at a small bar on the outskirts of town, a place I used to frequent in my younger days. The bar was quiet, with only a few patrons scattered around. I ordered a whiskey and sat at the bar, slowly nursing my drink as I lost myself in thought. The alcohol warmed me, but it did little to chase away the chill of my memories. As I sipped my drink, a tap on my shoulder snapped me out of my reverie. I turned to see someone from my past, Tom, an old friend I hadn't seen in years. "Jake? Is that really you?" Tom's voice was thick with disbelief. I forced a smile and nodded. "Yeah, Tom, it's me. It's been a long time." Tom pulled up a stool beside me, his eyes scanning my face with concern. "You look different. What happened to you, man?" I let out a dry chuckle. Life happened. We talked for hours, reminiscing about the old days, sharing stories and laughs. But I could sense the unspoken questions in Tom's mind. Questions about where I had been, what had happened to my marriage, and why I had disappeared so suddenly. As the night wore on, the conversation took a more serious turn. Tom leaned in, lowering his voice as if he was afraid of being overheard. "Jake, there's something you should know. After you left, things got complicated." My heart tightened. "Complicated how?" Tom hesitated, carefully choosing his words. "Sarah. She's not doing well. After you disappeared, she fell apart. The police got involved, there was an investigation, but nothing came of it. She lost the house, her job, everything. She's been staying with her sister, trying to put the pieces back together." A swirl of emotions swept through me, anger, guilt, and a strange sense of satisfaction. I had wanted Sarah to suffer, to feel the same gut-wrenching pain of betrayal that I had endured. But hearing about her downfall made it all too real. It wasn't the abstract revenge I had imagined. It was the life of a woman I had once loved, now in ruins. "Do you ever think about reaching out to her? Maybe trying to make amends?" Tom's voice was cautious, like he knew he was stepping into dangerous territory. I stared into my glass, watching the amber liquid swirl. The idea of confronting Sarah, of facing the wreckage we had both caused, filled me with dread. "I don't know, Tom. I don't know if I can." Tom nodded, seeming to understand the weight of what I was feeling. "It's not easy, man. But maybe it's time to start healing, for both of you." I didn't respond. I knew Tom was right, but the path to healing felt long, dark, and uncertain. As I finished my drink, the reality of my return began to sink in. I hadn't come back just to face my past, but to decide what kind of future I wanted. And that, more than anything, was the hardest decision of all. Despite all my doubts, I found myself standing outside Sarah's sister's house a few days later. Every time I had driven by, I'd found excuses to keep moving, postponing the inevitable confrontation. But today was different. Today, I couldn't avoid it any longer. I needed answers, closure, something to help me make sense of everything. My hand trembled slightly as I knocked on the door. The seconds stretched into what felt like hours, my heart pounding louder with each passing moment. Then, the door slowly creaked open, revealing Sarah. She looked different, older, with her face etched by the weariness of the past year. The vibrant, confident woman I had once known was now a shadow of her former self. For a long moment, we just stood there, staring at each other, words trapped by the weight of everything left unsaid. Finally, Sarah broke the silence, her voice soft and hesitant. "Jake." "Sarah," I replied, my voice rough, thick with emotions I hadn't yet processed. Sarah stepped aside, silently inviting me in. The house was modest, far from the comfort and elegance of the home we had once shared, but it was warm and inviting. We moved into the living room, settling on opposite ends of the couch, the silence between us growing heavier with each passing second. "I never thought I'd see you again," Sarah finally said, her voice wavering as she met my gaze. There was a mix of fear and hope in her eyes, a vulnerability I had never seen in her before. "I didn't know if I'd come back," I admitted quietly. "But I had to see you. I had to understand why." Sarah lowered her eyes to her hands, which she was nervously twisting in her lap. "I don't have a good answer, Jake. I was selfish. I wanted more than what I had, and I didn't appreciate what we had built. I thought I was in control of everything, but I wasn't. I made mistakes, terrible mistakes, and I ruined everything." As she spoke, the anger I had carried for so long began to dissolve, leaving behind a deep, aching sadness. "I know I wasn't perfect either, Sarah. I made my share of mistakes. But what you did, it shattered me." Tears filled Sarah's eyes, and she quickly wiped them away with the back of her hand. "I know. I'm so sorry, Jake. I wish I could take it all back. I would do anything to undo the pain I caused you." They fell into silence again, both lost in the memories of what had been and what they had lost. The room felt heavy with the weight of their shared past, the burden of the betrayal that had ripped them apart. Finally, Sarah spoke, her voice barely more than a whisper. "What do we do now? Do we just go our separate ways?" I sighed, leaning back into the worn cushions of the couch. "I don't know, Sarah. I came here looking for closure, but I'm not sure that's something I can find. Too much has happened. There's too much damage." She nodded, her expression a mix of understanding and sorrow. "I understand. I don't expect you to forgive me, Jake. I just want you to know how truly sorry I am." We sat there, the silence between us no longer as oppressive, but still heavy with the past. For the first time in a long while, I felt a small crack in the wall of pain and anger that had surrounded me since that fateful day. It wasn't much, but it was something, an opening, a possibility. "I need time," I finally said, my voice steady. "I don't know if we can ever be what we were, but maybe we can find a way to move forward, even if it's separately." Sarah managed a small, sad smile, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I'd like that, Jake. I really would." We remained seated, neither of us ready to say goodbye, yet both knowing that this confrontation, was a necessary step toward whatever came next. For the first time since everything had fallen apart, I felt the faintest glimmer of hope. Perhaps with time, we could both find some measure of peace. The days that followed our confrontation were marked by tentative steps toward healing. Sarah and I navigated a tricky terrain filled with conversations that reopened old wounds and memories that stirred emotions we had both tried to bury. We weren't trying to rebuild what was lost. Instead, we were trying to understand how to live with the scars. At first, our interactions were strained. The weight of our shared past hung over every word, every glance. We tiptoed around each other, unsure of what to say, afraid of saying too much or too little. But the need to find some form of resolution kept us both engaged, even when it hurt. One afternoon, we sat together on a bench in a quiet park where the trees swayed gently in the breeze. It was the first time in weeks that we had ventured out together, away from the confines of Sarah's sister's house. I broke the silence, my voice steady but reflective. "I don't know if I'll ever fully forgive you, Sarah. What happened? It changed me." She nodded, her eyes fixed on the ground. "I understand, Jake. I don't expect forgiveness. I just want you to know that I'm trying to make things right, even if I can't fix what I've done." We sat in silence, each lost in our thoughts. The past year had taken its toll on both of us, and the path to healing was neither clear nor easy. But there was a mutual understanding that we needed to find a way forward, even if that meant walking separate paths. In the weeks that followed, we continued to meet, sometimes for coffee, sometimes for a walk in the park. The conversations gradually shifted from the painful past to more mundane topics: how Sarah was adjusting to her new job, the progress she was making in therapy, and my plans for the future. These small talks weren't profound, but they were steps toward normalcy, toward a new kind of relationship that neither of us had anticipated. Over time, I found that the anger that had once consumed me began to fade. I realized that holding on to it only kept me chained to the past, preventing me from moving forward. One evening, as I sat on the porch of my new, modest home, I looked out at the setting sun and felt something I hadn't felt in a long time: peace. It wasn't a grand revelation, but rather a quiet acceptance that what was done could not be undone, and that was okay. I had confronted my demons, made my amends, and now it was time to live again, free from the shadows that had once darkened my every thought. Sarah, too, was finding her own way. The therapy sessions were helping her untangle the mess she had made of her life, and her new job provided a sense of stability. She knew she could never completely undo the hurt she had caused, but she was committed to learning from her mistakes and becoming a better person. Our relationship, though far from what it once was, evolved into something different. We weren't friends in the traditional sense, but there was a mutual respect and understanding between us. We had both been through hell and emerged, not unscathed, but stronger in ways we hadn't expected. We were no longer husband and wife, no longer enemies, just two people who had survived and were learning how to live again. And so, life moved on. It wasn't perfect, and it never would be, but it was enough. I had found a way to let go of the bitterness that had once consumed me, and in doing so, I discovered the peace I had long sought. As I watched the sun dip below the horizon, I knew that, finally, I was ready to embrace whatever came next.